Okay, so I'm gonna start over because I don't know how much of the stream caught that. I don't know how much of the stream that the stream caught. So anyway, I'm Carly. I have been doing this basically forever, as Alyssa said. Basically what it feels like. I've been doing this since I was a child. But I am here to talk today about contextualizing historical data and current projects in women's hockey. That my next presentation was teaching everyone statistical mechanics, but you gotta wait till the next hack for that. So why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because there have been more than 2 people showing up in my DMs on Twitter, poking me and going like, Carly, can you please check this because I don't know what's going on in this data. And I'm always happy to say, to check and say if it's working or not. But I also have another research career in astrophysics that takes up most of my time, so I can only answer so many DMs. I think it's really important too that everyone knows these quote unquote ghosts in historical data and this implicit knowledge that exists. I'm taking that term from David McIver on Twitter. But and I think it's also important that as we're progressing through this huge explosion of women's hockey projects to start building on the foundation of past projects as well. And also making a record before we all forget, because I know I forgot a lot of the projects that I'm mentioning today, and I'm sure there are projects that I have forgotten to include even now, which preemptively, I'm sorry. Additionally, meta hockey is currently a very limited scope of women's hockey projects, which I am hoping to change. So stay tuned in this presentation. Okay, so let's get to our first era of women's hockey analytics. We're going to start talking about the data. So pre-2015, this is the data that's available for the CWHL, for the NCAA, and for international tournaments, which I was kind of umbrella-ing under the IIHL. So these are the kind of like caveats that come with this data. For the CWHL, they have Olympic year centralizations to deal with, which means a bunch of Team USA players and Team Canada players go off and have a nice little huddle for a year and practice, play with each other exclusively, and maybe play Worlds or Four Nations before they play the Olympics. So, you subtract that entire player pool from a league, which changes the quality of play. The number of teams varies from year to year due to various expansions and collapses of teams, unfortunately, as the money flow changes. Late season NCAA signings, which is something we're familiar with in the NHL, but something that just happens in women's leagues too. Something really special about the CWHL is that there are under 18 players in the data set. I think Marie-Philip Lane started playing the CWHL when she was 15 or 16, which is frankly crazy. But that's definitely something we need to watch out for when we're doing stuff like aging curves, like my last project. So for the NCAA, we have data for Division 1 and 3. Centralization, I have been informed, also affects that. But otherwise, I'm personally not familiar with any other caveats to that data. As for international tournaments, which is, World Juniors, Worlds, and Olympics, we have very varying sets of data quality for that. Some of you might have seen them on Twitter. I think Alyssa and Mikhail were working on digitizing shot locations from various Olympics. So we have that, but for other ones, we just have the counting stats. That's cool. They also have very small sample sizes, which is very unfortunate because it is kind of top quality of play in the entire world because it's the Olympics. But at the same time, we can't do very good analysis because 4 years for the Olympics, and then every year for Worlds, for what, like 50 games maybe total. And then there's also a different ring size, but nobody investigated if that, and it makes a difference. So please don't look into that. As for projects, and on the analytics side, there were really only 3 names I could dig up for people who are doing analytics, which is Mike Burst, Jack Hahn, and Christopher Long for these various leagues. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to dig up actual projects, just like whiffs and mentions of them on Twitter. So That's why we need to archive things, people. Anyway, moving on. The next era, which I have named the mall era for various reasons that I'll get to in a minute, we primarily see the analysis of the NWHL because it, jumping to my last bullet point here, it has a very biased but very interesting play-by-play location data set for the first couple of years, which is why a lot of people chose to analyze that over the CWHL. It also has, for the very first year, the best set of women's hockey data that I've ever seen, which I will also show in a minute, but that was only for the first year, and I'm very sad about it. So constantly working towards that. The data caveats here is that, so when the NWHL was founded, the CWHL players, some of them migrated over, particularly like people who were playing for Boston, like Hillary Knight and Brianna Decker. But after the first few years of the NWHL, there was eventual migration back to the WHL due to conditions and other various factors. NWHL was affected by Olympic centralization in 2018. Will not be in 2022, primarily because most Olympic players are playing for the WHKYHAC or expected to. There also have some very varied access to resources in these first couple of years, because like the leagues, the teams were owned by the leagues for starting off, and then were eventually bought by private owners. And as those private owners bought the teams, they were given access to greater quality of resources like pre-game meals, trainers, gym space, etc. Also, something funky is that the Minnesota Whitecaps joined the NWHL a couple years ago, and they might show up in the CWHL data because the Minnesota Whitecaps are the only team to ever have won a Clarkson and Isabel Cup. There's a long story behind that we don't have time to get into, but they might show up in both data, depending on what you're looking at. NWHL is also affected by late season NCAA signings. I think a little more rarely than CWHL, but someone else is just on that. Okay, so why have I named this to the mall era? Well, Alyssa Longmuir, who is one of the other organizers of this conference, is essentially the backbone of women's hockey. The projects I'm going to talk about in this era, she has had a hand in 75% of them in one way or another, and she was one of the first to really start looking at in-depth statistical analysis in publications, as you can see on the right, and also made these super cool Tableau viz, which were super useful, and also tracked her own data for the AWIHL, and which is a feat in itself. So yeah, one half of this era is named after her. The other half is named after Mike Murphy, who is the other collaborator on this conference, who is the keeper of all counting stats for the NWHL, CWHL, Olympics, tracked them all himself, and actually corrected the leagues quite a few times. Has a bunch of other interesting publications, which are super cool, working on revamping NWHL game score, translation factors, and invented his own stat, which is very neat. So shout out to these two for being the absolute giants of this era. These are some of the other projects that happened in this small era. I have bolded the ones that I think, personally, I feel really were novel and moving forward our analysis of women's hockey, particularly my project on aging curves, Jack Kahn's analysis of the possession on Bill Marlett, CJ Turo's NWHL time on ice, which I know has been a lifesaver for many of us, Jake Blanchard's point shares, and Sean Ferris's game score, which all have been super helpful in helping us analyze the game we do today, as we do today. So this is the Magic data set by Carolyn Wolf. I don't know how to say her last name, but it's beautiful. It's an incomplete data set for the first year of the NWHL, but it has Corsi and shot locations, all calculated out. It's beautiful. I love it. I wish we had it again. We have the big data set, but it's still not quite enough, because this one particularly has both players on ice, all the players on ice for the home team for the event, and all the players on the away team for each event. So defense evaluation, anybody? One of the things one of the people I wanted to highlight was Rob Bowman, who many people know for his hockey abstract books, but he did actually do some women's hockey work. He actually gathered a bunch of data from various leagues from 2001 to 2017 and introduced the first version of translation factors for women's hockey and used them to identify the best player within this data set for using goals created above expectation. And Oilers' Brianna Decker, favorite player. So this is another project. These two other projects I wanted to highlight because I don't think they get enough attention. Since by Evan Oppenheimer, who is sadly not on Twitter anymore. Don't know what happened to him. But he invented this stat called betweenness, which I think needs to be revisited, especially for the later WHL seasons if possible. And also these really cool scoring network charts, which I think have use in, it's in passing analysis as, which is where it kind of feels going, I feel like. This is Matt Kane's Women's Olympic Hockey Predictions for 2018, accompanied by the only women's hockey viz by Micah. Would love to see more stuff like this. But I think this was a really cool prediction model, and we don't see a lot of prediction models in women's hockey, so I think this is really valuable for people who want to see prediction models. Anna Goldman was also a really big name in this era, so she did a bunch of visualizations, founded to help behind the benches with Mike, and also helped write the women's hockey analytics primer on the Ice Garden, which you should also check out. This is Even Strength, which is, I think, was the banner NWHL stat site, founded by Alyssa, Matt, Jake, and CJ. It's no longer working because the NWHL changed their data broker last year, and we no longer have play-by-play data and locations and stuff like that. I'm not exactly familiar with the status of the data set at this moment, outside of the Big Data Cup data, but unfortunately don't have the quality of data necessary to upkeep strength. Okay, jumping to the present. I've named for this era the Data Big Ben, keeping with the space. So in this era, we have the two leagues. I don't know if you could call it the PWHK a league, because I think they're classifying themselves as a quasi-union. I'm not really sure. But anyway, the NWHL was affected by the creation of the PWHPA because after the Olympics, everyone went back to their respective leagues, but the CWHL folded in 2019, which was incredibly sad, but a bunch of players decided to form the Professional Women's Hockey, or the Professional Women's Hockey Player Association. Yeah. So a bunch of people kind of jumped over there. So the quality of play changed in the NWHL. At the same time, though, they had an increased access to resources as the league kind of gained momentum and people began buying teams. The also expanded with the Toronto Six, and we got that lovely Big Data Cup release from Megan Chika and Stathletes. So thank you to them. For the PWHPA, it's very new data. I think Mikhail's done some stuff with the transition stats. Mike has done counting stats with them, but I think that's it. So, wide open fields, which is cool. The problem there is very sporadic games. They don't really have a set schedule. They just have their little tournaments, which are, is pretty neat, but it also means less data, and they also have very little data for translation factors in terms of current movement, because all of these players previously played in the CWHL, and haven't really played in Worlds or the Olympics yet due to the pandemic. So there's just not a lot of cross-league data there. Maybe that'll change for the Olympics. We now have the Sport Logic data set that was released for WHKYHAC. Very excited to see that later today, so go download the data. Okay, why I called this the Data Big Bang. So for the Big Data Cup, there were, I think, over 20 women's hockey projects. This is just a fraction of them. I'm not going to go all over all of them because I think they're all very exciting and I would talk for another hour. So this is 6 of them. So you can look at my presentation later if you wanted to go through them. It's also on the Ice Garden website, the whole list of them. This is the other half. So take a moment to absorb, I guess. Yeah, I was really excited to see all of these. And these are all the ones that me and Mike Murphy and a couple of other people were able to put together from Twitter and GitHub. So these, I think, all have GitHub repositories, or at least a paper attached. Okay, so what was Alyssa up to? She was doing some really cool NWHL bubble visualizations during this era, looking at doing some season prediction models, which again, prediction models are kind of rare in women's hockey, so that was interesting. She has some other fancy projects, which I know I couldn't find, and I know she has stashed away. So if you can find those, great. Send them to me so I can archive them. Mike, in this era, was up to inventing the next women's hockey website, Their Hockey Counts, which has historical info dating back to 1990, which is super exciting. He was also looking at aging curves again in the NCAA and starting to look at translation factors for the NWHL, and also looking at how that the face-offs in context of women's hockey. So, and also I wanted to highlight was Spencer, who has a really, really cool Tableau page, so I highly encourage you to check that out. Basically invented a couple of his own stats I haven't seen before, looked at some really in-depth analysis for the NCAA too. And really cool kid. High five. Nyan I worked with on the player archetypes project, and which I thought was very cool. Just shout out to us, I guess. And also looked at this really important project, I think, looking at systemic differences between men's and women's hockey in the NCAA, which I think is something really important to look at going forward. Mikhail was, during this time period, was basically outclassing all of us, doing these really, really cool visualizations for the CWHPA and MWHL, inventing his own stats along the way, doing expected goals, and looking at particularly USA and versus Canada rivalry series and some. Finally, I wanted to spotlight Ben Howell, who is a more recent addition to the women's hockey analytics community, who has looked at passing skill in the NWHL and also how to quantify passing type more value, which I think is very cool because I've never seen that before, aside from the other Big Data Cup project. Okay, and this is all the non-data Big Data Cup projects that have happened in the past couple years. Stuff I wanted to highlight were the Pick 224 prospect site by David Pearson, the NWHL ELO rating, they're being developed currently by Hospital, the Olympic/World/MWHL visualizations that Megan Shaka puts up on her Twitter and the Stathlete's Twitter, which I think are the best thing since sliced bread. And then also the NWHL player tracking project that the Bucket List is developing on Twitter, which I think has a huge market for application for the NWHL and other minor leagues. So where is this all going? Well, we have all of this data now. In past presentations, people will tell you that people have said that women's hockey analytics is a data desert. Well, it's not anymore. We have so many leagues to do analysis on. Additionally, we have some really detailed data for all of the asterisk data here, in particular for the international tournaments, the NWHL and the PWHPA, we have super detailed data from both sport logic and athletes that you should really look into, because the best women's hockey data set that I've ever seen so far. The data analysis that we're going to need to understand in the future, as I was, kind of doing this literary review, I think that something that we haven't really understood or quantified yet is quality of play changes from year to year. Because like so many of the good players, they're all good. So many of like the best players like Hillary Knight and Sarah Decker and Marie Philip change leagues year to year. So really impacts the data quality, or the quality of play. And then additionally, the positioning of the North American leagues on the international stage. I saw Mikhail and Holly in John's project on a women's hockey, I think, suggesting that, some of the best players are actually in the SCHL. So I would be really interested to see kind of putting the North American leagues in context of international leagues. Something I think we also need to understand, which I've been harping on about since the Big Data Cup, is understanding the differences between the men and women's game. As we saw in both Alyssa, Shayna, and Mike's presentation, and me and Nyan's, not always accurate to apply men's hockey analytics strategies to women's hockey, because the game is just fun. We play a little bit differently. There's more emphasis on passing, as Nyan showed last year. And I think that has a bigger impact than we realize. And then we also really need to, look out for the coming effects of #WinLeague. Maybe not, a specific merged league, but it inevitably either the PWHPA players will merge with the NWHL to create a new league, or they'll start a league of their own, or the NWHL will collapse, God forbid. But this is women's hockey is a constantly changing landscape. I think we really need to keep our eye on the ball in terms of interpreting the effect it has on the data. So yeah, what are our takeaways? There's so much data, so many people, so many projects, and also projects I've forgotten, so apologies to those people. But, because I've forgotten them, I'm sure other people have forgotten them, there's a clear need to archive things. So I am hosting a women's hockey analytics archiving event, or organizing one to submit projects and data sets and code to Meta Hockey, so we actually have a nice central location for everything that we can all just look up, and it exists already, so why not just put it. So my latest tweet should be this approval form, otherwise I will fix that as soon as I hop off, or you can just type it in, which is kind of hard, I guess, but yeah, cool. That was a lot of talking, so any questions, I guess?